10 years of sculpting and I've hit a wall. The smaller my sculptures get, the less realistic they look. But today I'm going to attempt my smallest and most realistic miniature yet. It's going to be no piece of cake, but that's exactly what I'm making. For the base color, I mixed white, translucent, and yellow clay together. And because cake edges are usually darker than the inside of the cake, I created a second color using brown, yellow, and translucent. I flattened the base color out and cut out 2 circles. Then I put the darker color in my pasta machine and I rolled it out on the thinnest setting. I used the same cutter to cut out some circles, which I placed on either end of the beige circles. Then I cut out 2 long strips of the brown color to cover up the centers. I blended these pieces together a bit and then I stacked the 2 cake layers with a piece of white clay in the middle. After cutting a decent slice, it dawned on me that the color of the cake was probably too solid looking to imitate the real thing. So I cut a small piece of the remaining layers and I baked it to get an idea of what the cake slice will look like once it's cured. As unfortunately expected, it looks way too opaque, and as much as I really don't want to, I decided to start over. I took some of the vanilla mix I had made earlier and I added more yellow and translucent clay to it. And I added more translucent to the outer edge color as well. I put it all together, cut out a slice, and I think it looks much better this time. Then I tried to give the cake some fluffy texture, but my polymer clay needle tool was way too big and it wasn't doing what I needed it to. I ended up switching to a sewing pin because it's quite a bit smaller than the needle tool, and I swirled the surface of the clay to get that fluffy cake texture. I textured the main cake color and the outer color separately so that the colors don't mix and blend. And I repeated the same process for the upper layer and the other side of the slice. To make a candle, I flattened some translucent blue clay and twisted it super thin. Then I cut off a small piece. Before moving on, I'm pre-baking the cake slice and the candle so that I don't accidentally squish and ruin them. Afterwards, I added a thin layer of white clay to the outside of the cake slice. And I pressed the candle into the top to create an indent for where I'm going to put it later. Because of how small the slice is, it slipped out of my hands and onto the floor multiple times. And luckily, because I pre-baked it earlier, none of the texture was destroyed, but I did end up getting dust all over the initial icing layer. So I used rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip to remove it all. This layer will be covered up in a moment anyway, but because the frosting will be white, the dust might show underneath it and I don't want to take any chances. Back to the candle, I used white paint to make it spirally. The smallest paintbrush I have was nowhere near small enough for this, so I used a pen to paint the spirals. Painting at this scale was a terrible and almost impossible idea, and I refuse to admit how much time I spent trying to perfect it before I realized that I could just make the whole thing out of clay. But I hope you watch the ads, because I might need to see an optometrist after this. I had to pre-bake the new candle like I had done for the first one, but I didn't want to waste oven time on this tiny little thing, so I used a heat gun instead. Back to the cake, it's time to make the frosting. And to do this, I mixed white clay with a small amount of liquid clay. I didn't want it to look too creamy because when I think of cake, I think of American buttercream, which tends to be grainy and sort of dry. So after the mixture became sticky and elastic, I frosted the cake. I debated whether or not I should try to frost the inside of the slice without baking again first, but there is nowhere I can hold the cake without messing up the part that's already frosted. So I decided to further contribute to this oh my god, am I having a stroke? So I decided to further contribute to this month's electric bill and bake it again. Then I very lightly frosted the inner layer to give it some texture as if a knife had just cut through it. And then I baked it for the last time. Moving on, I coated some black thread with a bit of UV resin. I cured it and then I cut off the smallest little piece to use as a wick. And I used some more of that resin to attach it to the clay candle. I was planning on adding a flame to the wick, so I tested it out first on a backup candle that I had made. And I feel like it came out okay, but it looks too cartoony to me, especially in comparison to the whole cake, so I decided to just skip the flame altogether and just stop here. So to finish it all off, I used satin glaze to make the piece look less dull. Without a shadow of a doubt, this is the most realistic miniature I have ever made. And finally, here's a better look.